he has a really dark and awful past when it comes to other people's lives. He's failed up. He's fine. He's rich. But when it comes to other people's lives, it's all gravy.
His wife who committed suicide after, correlation doesn't cause causation, but a lot of people say after she read his diary, where he in detail explicitly wrote about his multiple dozens of affairs, that in part helped, they say, contribute to her downfall or emotional downfall.
Francesca Fiorentini and Wajahat Ali discussed the confirmation of RFK Jr. into Trump's cabinet. We're going to take a look at clips of Francesca and Wajahat Ali discussing this. I have my opinions about this too. Let's check it out together.
The least qualified man on earth is now the director of Health and Human Services. RFK Jr. on a party line vote, except Mitch McConnell, who's coming out like a rebel in his old age because he survived something called polio. Folks, polio used to kill folks. If you're Mitch McConnell's age, 932 years old, and you're the crypt keeper, you recall when there was no such vaccines for polio and people used to die. Mitch McConnell himself had polio. Thankfully, there were vaccines. He was treated, and he decides not to relitigate science that is settled. So he was that one Republican that said no, but everyone else bent the knee. And RFK Jr., folks, RFK Jr., an anti-vaxxer. RFK Jr., a man who has no medical training whatsoever. RFK Jr., a man who's promoted anti-Semitic conspiracies, eugenics. RFK Jr., a man whose own cousin came out and called him a sexual predator. Mm-hmm. RFK Jr., who has his fetish with animals, had a brainworm once, no medical degrees, picked up a dead bear, dropped it off in Central Park. According to his cousin, Caroline Kennedy, used to blend up little mice and animals and feed it to his hawk, I recall, yes. If it was. Yes. That RFK Jr., whose advice apparently Samoa followed, anti-vax advice, and 80 people, mostly children, were killed from preventable measles deaths. That RFK Jr. is now the director of HHS, which overlooks some small programs like Medicare, Medicaid, CDC.
Which he doesn't know the difference between, by the way, as evidenced by the confirmation hearing.
But he'll learn. He'll get into it. He'll become presidential like a Donald Trump eventually in his old age. That man is now, Francesca, the head of our HHS. It is one of the most frightening confirmations that I was hoping to avoid. This is in addition to Kash Patel, who's up for being the head of FBI. This is in addition to Pete Hegseth, who is now our Secretary of Defense, in addition to Tulsi Gabbard, who is the Director of National Intelligence. It was RFK Jr.'s confirmation as the head of HHS, the one that really put fear in my heart.
You mean this guy?
You cannot trust medical advice from medical professionals. That doesn't mean that you don't have a great doctor that you should listen to, but you need to take control of your own health care and you need to question everything.
Do your own research. He's Mr. Do Your Own Research before Do Your Own Research was even a thing. And I gotta say, this RFK Jr.'s confirmation is deeply upsetting, yes, but also reflects the way that Americans' brains broke in the pandemic. I think because, and I'm excited to talk to Dr. Patel about this, the lack of a public health infrastructure, the lack of affordable and accessible healthcare, the fact that people don't have neighborhood or community doctors they can regularly visit. And everyone was just going online and doing their research. And maybe I should inject bleach, and maybe I should drink ivermectin, or maybe we should do herd immunity, or whatever other cockamamie idea that people were floating, because there was no national response. And so, Waj, we are on the precipice of potentially a bird flu epidemic.
I want to stop here for just 1 second. I agree with what Francesca Fiorentini is saying here. And I do agree with one thing that RFK Jr. said there, that, they're making fun of him about the do your own research, but you do have to be an advocate for yourself. When you go to the doctor, I think that a lot of people just blindly accept whatever the doctor says. And I can say for myself, in 2023, I got prescribed a medication for a very minor thing, a very commonly prescribed medication, and I had a horrible reaction to it. And it made me very, very sick. and it took me months, literally months, to get better. And I went to I went to several doctors after this, but I went to a doctor after that, essentially for like a second opinion. And that doctor said they should have never given you that particular medication. That is a medication basically of last resort after they've tried everything else. Unfortunately, they give this to people right off the bat. But, this doctor said, if you had come here, we never would have given you that. That was you got the wrong diagnosis, essentially, and the wrong prescription for that. So, I went in and trusted the doctor, and it turned out to be a big mistake. I'm okay now, but I was sick for a long, long time. So I do think that people have to, you have to check the side effects on medications that you're taking. I think it's smart to get second opinions and all of that. That said, we also can't have things like people choosing not to take vaccines, children in school not taking vaccines. And I'm not even talking about the COVID vaccine. I'm talking about things like measles and all of that. If we get like they're talking about here, polio, if we get into a scenario where people view these things as optional, we're going to have real problems. And those are the things that JFK or RFK Jr. seems to be advocating for.
Say nothing of, all the other pandemics that could be headed our way. Mother Nature, please. And you have a president who was, in my belief, voted out in part because of his mishandling of a global pandemic, COVID-19. And now he is putting people in power who straight up don't believe in germ theory, which is RFK Jr. So it's amazing that Donald Trump learned all the wrong lessons and more scarily was coaxed by his own base, who was anti-vax all the way, to walk away from maybe the only good thing he did in his entire 4 years was the Operation Warp Speed, rolling out vaccines, right? And making sure that they were people could receive them.
And also, I'm glad you mentioned that. And we keep receipts. The only time Donald Trump has ever been booed by MAGA, the only time. Do you remember when, Francesca?
Vaccines.
When he promoted vaccines, and I believe he was in a rally in Alabama and they booed him. And so this is what happens when you radicalize your base. You become hostage to the base and their self-destructive tendencies. Yeah. And this is the same base that literally there were people dying. They literally were dying of COVID, but they said they wanted to own the libs and not take the vaccine. Same thing happened during Obamacare. We have a little bit of time, so I want to play these two clips before we introduce our guest today, Dr. Kavita Patel, who will be joining us in a few minutes. This is the new director of HHS. Just these two clips. Here you go. Here's one.
And I was at the bottom of my class. I started doing heroin. I went to the top of my class. Suddenly I could sit still and I could read.
Not only did he do heroin, and which is like fine, people do heroin, they get clean. He also got clean. But RFK Jr. also got his siblings addicted to drugs. Right. One of them died, like I believe committed suicide. Like he has a really dark and awful past when it comes to other people's lives. He's failed up. He's fine. He's rich. But when it comes to other people's lives, it's all gravy.
His wife, who committed suicide after, I mean, correlation doesn't cause causation, but a lot of people say after she read his diary, where he in detail explicitly wrote about his multiple dozens of affairs, that in part helped, they say, contribute to her downfall or emotional downfall. It was so devastating. She killed herself. And this is a man who, by the way, just talks off from the top of the dome. He just feels like something and he just says it. Who needs facts? You DIY your medicine, baby. Here's a clip with another DIY guy, Joe Rogan. This is our new head of HHS, folks.
Well, I think the Wi-Fi radiation is a lot worse than people think it is, but, I don't think.
How so?
Well, Wi-Fi radiation does all kinds of bad things, including causing cancer. But cancer's not the worst thing. They also, it opens up, Wi-Fi radiation opens up your blood-brain barrier. And so all these toxins that are in your body can now go into your brain.
Well, how does Wi-Fi radiation open up your blood-brain barrier?
Yeah, now you're gone beyond my expertise.
You can't make this shit up, folks. That was a real clip.
I mean, and that's the other thing, is that he takes these kernels of things that we should rightfully investigate. Like, okay, like, whatever, Wi-Fi and 5G, and all the stuff. It's like, but then he twists it. And on top of that, it's layered with some really terrifying eugenics. Again, we saw him in the confirmation hearing say that he thought that Black people didn't need as many vaccinations because they had higher immunity. It's like, what are you talking about? That Jewish people and Chinese people couldn't get COVID. Tell that to my uncle, who is sadly no longer here because he died of COVID. So on and on and on. These are our lives.
And Francesca, that was on tape. We got him on tape saying that promoting that anti-Semitic and racist conspiracy theory, and also, God bless Senator Angela Alsobrooks, who went back and forth and called him out on his literally pro-Nazi eugenic view of somehow that Black people create more antigens. It's all nonsense.
And Francesca Fiorentini and Wajahat Ali are right about this. Sadly, none of it mattered because RFK Jr. still got confirmed because he didn't have enough Republicans stand up and say, no, this guy is unqualified. And I've said this over and over again. I've said this on this channel. If you want to have RFK Jr. doing something like he's going around to schools and talking about, the need to do exercise and to eat fruits and vegetables and things like that, great. I would have absolutely no problem with that. But when he's throwing things out like Wi-Fi, is giving people cancer, but then he says, I don't know the science of it because, he's just throwing shit out there. That's where things get to be dangerous and scary. Some of the other positive things that RFK Jr. talks about is the chemicals that are allowed in food in the United States that other countries, like countries in the EU, don't allow. Let's have a conversation about that. That's great. But I suspect that the things that RFK Jr. will be able to get through, because it's already happening in a lot of states, is that vaccines will just be optional. So we're going to have outbreaks of polio and measles and, continued outbreaks of some of these things. But the things like trying to make our food better to meet the standards of the rest of the industrialized world, those things won't happen because the large corporations will be able to keep that from happening in the United States because everything we do here is based on money. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree with Francesca Fiorentini and Wajahat Ali about RFK Jr.? Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. This is Chris on Culture, and I will see you in the next video.